But at the end of the day, if you're not integrating and actually asking yourself when you come back to sobriety, what did I learn? And like, for instance, maybe you went into this experience and you experienced ecstasy and euphoria, like you hadn't experienced since you were a kid. And you're like, oh my God, this was amazing. And then you come out and your day-to-day life is that somber. Maybe you're working a job you don't like, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, man, I guess I need more cannabis to feel that feeling again. Well, now this starts the pattern of dependency and externalizing of power, because what you missed in there was that cannabis wasn't giving you any experience that wasn't already inside of you, right? But there's something blocking it. And now your real work is getting curious and figuring out what belief system, what story, what societal pressure, what family pressure, what in there is preventing me from feeling the ecstasy and euphoria I felt in that plant medicine experience every minute of every day.
Welcome to the Spear and Clover podcast, the show where military mindset meets the spirit of the puppy. I'm your host, Jason Skisick, the entrepreneurial evangelist, and each week I bring you the stories of visionaries who see the world as it could be and can't help but take action. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and review. This is the best way to stay in the loop when we drop new content. It's rare that you feel honored to meet someone and spend time with them. Perhaps you meet a role model or person you look up to. For me, my introduction to Ryan Sprague was a great honor. He has a kindness and grace that immediately endears you to him. Combine that with an accepting demeanor and a truly world-class knowledge of his subject matter, and you've got yourself one hell of a podcast guest. Ryan is clearly a man with a mission. In his case, he spends his time helping others optimize their relationships with plant medicines, as well as to advocate for a more sustainable cultivation process. He realized that while many Americans now have legal access to cannabis, far too often they're misusing it in the same ways that they had with alcohol, sugar, and caffeine. His brilliance is in recognizing all the ways these substances can add depth and insight to your life, while avoiding the pitfalls we often find ourselves falling into. Regardless of if you use cannabis or not, my conversation with Ryan reveals so much about what it is to be a human being who must find balance even in the things we enjoy. It's my great honor to present to you my friend, Ryan Sprague. Ryan, how are you, buddy?
I am amazing, man. So happy to be with you, Jason. This is amazing. And I was just saying before we hit record that I just got off hosting a podcast, so it's nice to switch seats.
Dude, I love it too. I actually like it as well. I really have enjoyed, I've been on a few podcasts myself and I'm trying to be on more, and I've really enjoyed that as well. Before we get too far into it, Ryan, you have one of the most interesting businesses that I've come across while recording this show. So why don't you tell the folks at home about your business and what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I started Highly Optimized, and we can get into the origin story behind what got me to this point, but I'll kind of jump forward to when I started it. So I was working in the cannabis industry, and I have a psychology background, and like all these different things, spirituality, fitness, health, all this stuff that could kind of be, quasi, said as self-development. And I was working as a patient care advocate in the cannabis industry. And I had a deep relationship with cannabis, and I was finding that a lot of people were doing more harm than good with cannabis, and that it's a slippery slope, right? I really feel it's the most misunderstood plant medicine in existence. Most people just use it and they numb out with it, and they don't really know what this plant can do. And so through a series of events, which we can get into if you'd like to, I had an awakening moment in Las Vegas, the last place I'd ever expect to have an epiphany, right? But there I was and I had it. So I realized that in order to be able to give the individualized care that I wanted to give in the cannabis industry, I would have to start my own business. And I did not want to open a dispensary. I did not want to run a cultivation center. I had opportunities to do both, but I saw how the industry was run, and it's very cutthroat, and it's really challenging to be able to, especially in Massachusetts, be able to grow the way I want to grow, which is organic regenerative agriculture, because for some reason, the lawmakers here see any microbe basically as bad. So they see something like LAB in Korean natural farming, which stands for lactic acid bacteria, as quote unquote mold. So if you have those in your establishment, in your facility, and they come in to do a check, they're going to tax you essentially and fine you for having these things around. So it's really hard to grow the way that I like to grow. And so I realized, I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do? So right after I decided to start Highly Optimized, I knew I wanted to do a podcast. So I started there. And right around the same time, I met Mr. Mark England. And I had heard him on a podcast about 3 years prior to that. And I had loved what he was talking about. It really resonated with both me and my partner. And, I had kind of forgotten about it and that I had heard him on there. And I started, when I went through this awakening, just really feeling this call to put my voice out there more. And so I started making Facebook posts, right? Like no paragraphing, just like pouring my heart out. In one of them, I spoke about language and how it creates our reality. And someone commented and said, hey, where did you learn that? That sounds really cool. And so I tagged Mark. I was like, oh, this guy, definitely knows what he's talking about when it comes to language. And about an hour later, I got a message from him. Not only a message, but a voice note, right? Yeah. And he was the first one voice noting, and now it's all I do, and it was a premonition. But, he was like, hey, man, I really like what you're speaking about. We should hop on a call. So we hop on a call, and long story short, I end up signing up for Enlifted Level 1, which is his program. And I get into that fully knowing without a doubt that I'm not going to be a coach, but, I'll get into this for myself. It'll be cool. Sure. And so right when I get into that, about halfway through, the pandemic hits. And so now I'm able to quit my job, which was not in alignment for me for quite a while. So I leave the dispensary and I have all this time. I'm like, what am I going to do? So I start doing some more inner work, inner investigative work, and start bringing new awareness to light that I'm like, okay, maybe I'll get into coaching, but I'll never do a group program. Maybe I'll do one-on-one. Sure. And so I start giving up free sessions and I start loving it. And people that I'm working with, they start wanting to be like, hey, can I work with you on a paid basis? And I'm like, whoa, I'm getting paid to do this now. So I start getting into coaching, and I had this psych background that I wasn't using. And so it almost brought that back into my life, where the therapist route, like I was saying before we hit record, I didn't want to wear khakis the rest of my life. So I was like, I don't want to be in a therapist office. So I was like, what am I going to do with this? And so that's originally why I had found cannabis and really loved that, got into that. And so now I'm thinking, I'm going to get into coaching, and cannabis will be my hobby. It'll be my thing. And so as I'm starting to, about 6 months later, I start hanging out with Mark. So I start going to his house. I start going to different retreats and people I'm meeting. I just keep saying yes. It was my own little surrender experiment. If you read that book by Michael Singer. And so I'm just saying, yes, I end up in Mexico. I end up in Oregon. I end up in California. I end up in Colorado, Texas, like all these places, meeting all these amazing people. And they're all asking me about cannabis all the time. And I'm like, guys, I'm a coach now, this cool, it's awesome that I do this stuff with cannabis. But, I was kind of like, oh, why does this keep coming back into my life? And it wasn't until a year later where I was at a retreat that I was hosting on Martha's Vineyard, and I hosted a cannabis workshop in which 5 minutes before the workshop, I didn't know what I was going to do for it. I had some ideas of things I could do that I had done at retreats that I had been at, but I wanted to do something new, because a lot of the people there had already experienced my cannabis ceremonies and things like that. And so at this point, I'm still full on going to create a program for self-development called Be Your Own Guru. Someone can steal a name if they want to, and because I'm not going to use it now. And so I was going through this, and after this workshop, I invented this modality called Conversation with Cannabis, tried it out on the guys that were at my retreat. They loved it. And as soon as I got back, I started having some downloads of like, the world of cannabis needs some guidance. And, I really love cannabis and I have a deep relationship with it. And so I'm like, what if, I was talking to my business partner, I'm like, what if we made a cannabis program? That's nothing out there is for that. Like, we haven't seen that before. And so as soon as I started asking what if, not only did Angelo and all the people that I was getting mentored by go, we were just wondering when the hell you were going to realize that that's your stick, right? Yeah. But I started inventing all these different modalities that just started getting channeled to me. And I'll say at first, like, I didn't really think of them. They just channeled through me. Sure. And that's where Connect with Cannabis was born. And since then, since I said yes to involving coaching into the cannabis space, it has been an explosion of just, people interested in this. I just went on Aubrey Marcus to talk about it. I've been on Paul Chek's podcast. Everyone is like, wow, this is really needed. And so it's really been a journey of following my heart that got me to start Highly Optimized, got me to start Connect with Cannabis, and now got me to start the new program we're creating called Grow with Cannabis, where I'm actually going to teach people how to learn organic regenerative agriculture, how to ensure their energy is properly regulated before they go into their grow room, because plants, like humans, they're sentient. So the same way that if someone walks in a bad mood and you're like, ooh, what's up with them? Like, I feel this weird thing with them. Plants feel the same way. So it's kind of this quasi self-development, organic regenerative agriculture and sacred union with cannabis type program that we're creating now. And it's been so amazing, man. Like, my heart is just so charged every single day. And in that time, I forgot to mention also that a year ago on Bicycle Day, I started my second podcast. So I'm one of those crazy people that has two podcasts and does weekly releases on posts.
I'm close already. Yeah, go ahead.
It's so much fun. And so I started this one time on psychedelics, where I talk to people about.
I'm going to stop you right there. Bicycle Day. Tell everybody what Bicycle Day is.
Yes. Bicycle Day is the first time that anyone ever interacted with LSD.
Right.
And the gentleman that invented it, essentially, he found it, he kind of invented by accident, spilled some on his hand and took a bicycle ride home and had this very profound experience and was like, what the hell? I believe it was Albert Hoffman, right? That created LSD. Yeah. So he went home on this bike ride, had this profound experience. And then he ended up creating his book, LSD, My Problem Child, and all of these things. And that's really what catapulted LSD. And as a funny side note too, a lot of people hypothesize that the reason that LSD is different than say psilocybin or one of these older sacred medicines
Mm-hmm.
is because, with psilocybin and all these things, people have been interacting with them for eons. And so the shared experiences within these medicines are much deeper, right? Because more people have experienced it, whereas LSD was only invented less than 100 years ago, right? So a lot of people think that the reason that LSD is so different in terms of experience is not only because it's synthetic, but because it just hasn't been around as long. And so it's almost like the library of experiences within that medicine are just not as broad. And so it's very interesting. And that's a fun side note that I love to talk about as well. But yeah.
Yeah. So much in there. First of all, I love watching you talk. I love watching anybody talk about something when they love what they're doing. And clearly, whether you're listening to this and you're not interested in plant medicine or you think Ryan's a quack or whatever, I don't care. Just watching you, if you're watching the video or even listening in your car, like just watching you get excited about it gets me excited about it, right?
Thank you.
And so let's dive in a little bit. First of all, you talk about plant medicine. Obviously, unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard about the shamanic tradition that has gone through all of these different cultures for all of these years. And so one thing that jumps out, just listening to you talk about it, is it seems like as a culture we've come around on the plant medicine, hugely, like a landslide in the last 20 years, let's say. But still a lot of work to be done. Mm-hmm. But what we haven't come around on is the shamanic tradition. What percentage of what you do is about the plant medicine, and what percentage of what you're interested in and what people like you do is about this shamanic tradition?
Going against normal math rules, I would say it's 100% in both areas.
Okay,
and it's funny because, really what Connect with Cannabis is there's many programs out there that can teach you the science behind the endocannabinoid system and the current science out on cannabis and the nervous system and all of these types of things. Mm-hmm. But what we found was that there was no one actually speaking to the experience of where you're going, what you're interacting with, and what cannabis is really here to do, which we believe is here to allow us to connect deeper to this reality. And it sounds counterintuitive because a lot of plant medicines, they allow you to leave this reality, right? And so with cannabis, what I found is that except in very high doses, it allows us to connect deeper to ourselves, those we love, the important work we do in the world and the world around us. But here's the thing, it's a very slippery slope. And one of the reasons we created Connect with Cannabis is because we realized that plant medicines right now are exploding in popularity. And a lot of people are doing much more harm than good with them because they have no idea. They have no idea how to use them. And they're really lacking guidance. And this is what I saw in the cannabis industry. And so what I realized was that a lot of people are using cannabis specifically the same way they'd use alcohol, the same way they'd use opiates, the same way they'd use tobacco. And so what I started realizing was, well, okay, there's one side where great that you're using cannabis because you're not going to overdose from it. Sure. But what are you losing at the same time? Well, I can tell you from personal experience that what cannabis can do, and it's not cannabis doing it, it's you doing it with unconscious intention, is it can numb out your emotions and allow you to have a very gray state. And in addition to that, it can also just allow you to actually become more disconnected from life. And so the whole idea of cannabis changes when we enter the idea of intention within it. That's the first step. There's a whole step process I can bring you through for this. But, when you start actually consciously asking the plant, like, this is what I'm looking for in this experience, and then being able to get yourself out of the way enough to experience the oftentimes very challenging experiences that come forth as a result of you consciously saying, hey, I'm looking to feel more connected. Show me what's in the way of my creativity that I can't face or any of these things. Then what might come up for you is much more challenging. And I think that's why a lot of people intuitively might know this, might not, but they don't really ask anything of the plant because they're not looking to face challenges. They're looking to numb out with it. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. And to that point, first of all, my story is, I think, similar to a lot of folks that I've met recently. And that is, I tried marijuana and pretty much just marijuana, a little bit of alcohol when I was in high school a few times, let's call it 6 months or so. And I just was like, it makes me sleepy. I don't like it. I don't like not being in control of my, faculties and da-da-da-da-da. And I came back to using marijuana later in life after I was 30, in my mid 30s. And it was as like the CBD and kind of recovery from fitness. I own a CrossFit gym. It came from a perspective of enhancement, right?
Mhm.
And I had a very different experience where I do talk to people all the time and they're like, oh, marijuana does this to me and I don't like that. And to some extent, I think that somebody like you has a lot to say about that, right? So,
Mhm.
so what would you tell somebody who maybe has had experiences with marijuana that have not been productive? Because I agree with you. I think you can use any of these plant medicines to numb out and make yourself smaller, right?
Yes.
I always think of like drugs as like there's certain drugs that make you bigger, there's certain drugs that make you smaller. The drugs that I'm interested in, the very few drugs that I'm interested in, typically are just revealing sort of the truth, right?
Yes.
So maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I love this question because it gets into taking ownership over your experience in
Yeah.
life as a whole. And I think this is one of the things that plant medicines can teach us in order to live our lives through. And so I think a lot of people are not taking ownership over their lack of intention and their lack of participation in the experience that is cannabis, plant medicines, etc. And so exactly what you said, oh, cannabis makes me sleepy, cannabis makes me that. It's like you're the only one that makes you anything. So a common one is cannabis makes me lazy. No, cannabis acts as the permission slip that unconsciously you were looking for that made you lazy, right? So it's like, these kind of things can be challenging to hear, but at the same time, if we want to be able to have a healthy relationship with these plants and therefore ourselves, because as within, so without, the law of correspondence and hermetic principle says that we can only have within or without what we have within first. So we've heard you can only love someone else as much as you love yourself.
Stop you again. You're rolling. I love your excitement. What is that law and what does it say?
Yes. So there's 7 laws. I don't know them all off the top of my head. I can list quite a few of them, but there's the hermetic principles.
Okay.
And these are really based on the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. And so I'm an initiate of the modern mystery school, which is where I've learned a lot of what I know about shamanism and these types of things. I don't label myself a shaman. I think a lot of training is needed for that. And that's currently what I'm in. But right now, I'm just very interested in it. It's something I'm exploring. But these hermetic principles are really guidelines for life. So one of them, my favorite one, is the law of correspondence, which people have probably heard as within, so without, as above, so below. And so what that really means, because a long time I would hear that and be like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
But it means we've all heard before, you can only love someone else as much as you love yourself. That is the law of correspondence in action. So it comes to the notion that everything is an inside job. So if you want your life to be happier, all you have to do is look inside. If you want a better relationship, all you got to do is look inside. The more that we put the focus on the external world, the more that we externalize our power. And this is what people do a lot with plant medicines. And this is why I say they can be a great training ground for life.
The more we look, say that again, the more we, say the external thing again.
Yeah. So the more that we look externally for results in life, the more we externalize our power, because we forget that we forget that, and I won't say I for a long time, to make it more personal, forgot that I am the creator of my reality. That's what I choose to believe, right? And everyone has the opportunity to believe what they want about life. And it's not my place to say what there's no objective reality. There's no objective truths in the world except I am, right? That we are. But I think that for me, what has really allowed me to take a lot of solace and a lot of serenity in life and a lot of peace in life is realizing that I do create my own reality. And so if there's something that I don't like showing up in my reality, well, then in some way, shape, or form, it must be something that's off within me. Because if we understand that we are the creator of our reality, then everything is a perception. And so a great example of this is how 2 people looking at the same cloudy day, one person could be excited because they get to go inside and get cozy and read a book. And the other person's like, wow, I fucking hate any day that's not sunny. This sucks, right? So what we know is in that scenario, there's no objective reality, right? There's no objectiveness to that. Because if there were, then everyone would have the same experience to a cloudy day. Everyone would have the same experience with cannabis, which we know, and everything else in the world too. But I'll use those 2 examples, but we know that's not true. So for instance, like I have found a really healthy relationship with cannabis. Some other people do not, right? Some other people are addicted to it, dependent on it. We can get into that because I really think that there's a deeper level than just externalizing and saying, oh, the plant's addictive. And that's something we can get into. But at the end of the day, if there's no objectiveness to, let's say, cannabis, right? Then what else is there? Well, there's subjectiveness, right? There's our internal perception of what this plant does and how it affects us. And so if we want to be able to actually understand, first of all, cannabis is not for everyone, right? That's the first thing I want to say. But if you're someone who likes this plant and you're starting to find undesirable results with the plant, such as dependency, such as like, I don't know, I just smoke it every day, so I continue smoking it, which is a common story. If you're looking to change that, Well, it's not the plant that's going to change it. It's not the amount of THC. It's not like, what strain you get. It's not what method of ingestion you do. It's something residing within you.
Yep.
And this is most of the things that most people are really scared to look at. And I get it. I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy. It might be simple to understand, oh, it's an inside job, but it's not easy, right? But at the same time, setting a PR in a deadlift isn't easy. Yet at the end of the day, when you do it, you feel like a tank, right? And so for a lot of people listening that I imagine are into fitness, start thinking about this as just a different PR you're going to set, right?
Yeah.
Where now you're like, okay, the PR I'm going to set is changing my belief system around why I'm interacting with cannabis daily, why I feel dependent on it, what the plant is for me. And I think that when we start looking at things as an inside job, we start being able to have a lot more power, because it stings for about 5 minutes going, oh, the reason I'm getting undesirable results of this plant is because of me, right? But once you actually, like, it's kind of like that Home Alone thing. I made my parents disappear. I made my parents disappear, right? Where it's like, you mean it's all inside of me? Oh my God, it's all inside of me. So what that shows you is that, yes, you can spend money on mentors and coaches, and I recommend that for sure. It's helped me a lot. But in theory, if you can get still enough, you can figure out all the answers to your own questions just in stillness. And so it doesn't necessarily take any money to do so. You can speed up the process by having mentors that can help you in these kind of things. But realizing that life is an inside job helps at least me realize that, oh, so if it's an inside job, then I must have it all in there to fix it. It's just figuring it out and getting past the limiting beliefs and stories that are currently telling me that I can't, couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't be able to figure it out by myself. And I think that's where, I look at cannabis, and what Connect with Cannabis is based on is allowing people to understand that, hey, listen, this plant is not the moon or sun, right? It's not the end all be all. It's not the point. It's the finger that can point you back to your own sun and moon, right? Your own intuition, your own higher self, your own consciousness, whatever, when you become disoriented. And I think it's the same thing as a teacher, right? Like if you want to learn psychology, and so you get into school and you learn psychology level 1, let's say, from a teacher. Well, there's a certain point when you graduate and you might not need to work with that teacher again, either ever or for a certain amount of time. And so what we really do in Connect with Cannabis is help people see, like, hey, if you're going to this plant every single day and you don't even know why you're going to it, then you're not using a medicine or a teacher, you're using a substance. And it's not a judgment, right? It's just an observation of like, hey, if you're looking to interact with this and really see what the full power is, you must be able to be conscious in your relationship. There's no judgment if you're using it as a substance and that's fine for you. That's cool, right? It's not my job to say what's right or wrong or what the right amount is and the wrong amount, but it's just about becoming conscious about why you're using it, how much you're using it, and what your purpose in using it is.
But already you've nailed down for me, just listening to you talk about it, a few things. One, I can see that externalization of, like, if you're living your life by external rubrics, you're in trouble, right? And you talk about a fitness metaphor for the deadlift. For me, I have this concept of kind of core to extremity. In fitness, we talk about core to extremity. And if you want to, display some amazing result out at your extremities, you have to really work on your core strength and your control and hip extension, all those other, literal things. But from the other perspective is, if you want to drive a Lamborghini, or you want to, experiment with plant medicines, or you want to go, live on an island and it's a beautiful home, you have to work on the reasons why you're doing those things. And all of the drivers behind that, get everything aligned in your core. And then it's easy to then display those things at your extremity, right? And so just listening to you talk, like, I love that metaphor for your purposes. Because certainly, we're in a world now where you're in, I think it's 23 states. You can walk up to the counter and you can buy this amazing, complex, plant medicine. But we're in a world where I probably could find 5 or 10 people that are, in that shamanic tradition that would maybe help you understand and align the core before we go to the extremity, right? But for most people, for thousands and millions of people in those 23 states, and certainly illegally in others, they just go home with a bag of drugs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know I have friends. For me, it's psilocybin is the one that I typically find myself advocating for people. And they're like, but then I would have to look inside me. And kind of like the Home Alone thing. It's like, but then you would have to look inside you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And it's funny because a lot of people, and I was this person for a long time. So by no means do I want people to think that I'm on a pedestal talking like those people down there. It's like, I've been there, so I can speak to these things. But most people think that the experience themselves, like the PEAK peak experience, is like the real gem. But really, the real work starts when you come back to sobriety and you actually have to figure out and apply and integrate what you learned in that PEAK experience into your life. Because if you're not, then you're really messing with fire, because psychedelics and plant medicines, they disintegrate you from your day-to-day reality, right? Your lease on life. And so every time that you're going out, there is a potential that you don't exactly come back packaged in the way you want. And luckily, there are shamans and medicine people you can work with to help bring you back. But that's a big ordeal, right? Most people don't want to actually have to go do that. And most people don't really know what it feels like to come back and not be fully integrated. So they might just be like, oh, I feel off, right? Maybe they pick up a negative entity, especially in these big ayahuasca ceremonies. I mean, this is a huge thing Paul Chek talks about. And so a lot of people are playing with fire without creating sacred space, without saging, without cleansing beforehand. And again, it's no judgment. It's just like getting into this and realizing, wow, I am very glad I know what I know now, because there was a lot of times where I could have been in a really challenging scenario, both with cannabis, with LSD, psilocybin, DMT, all of these medicines. But at the end of the day, if you're not integrating and actually asking yourself when you come back to sobriety, what did I learn? And like, for instance, maybe you went into this experience and you experienced ecstasy and euphoria, like you hadn't experienced since you were a kid. And you're like, oh my God, this was amazing. And then you come out and your day-to-day life is that somber. Maybe you're working a job you don't like, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, man, I guess I need more cannabis to feel that feeling again. Well, now this starts the pattern of dependency and externalizing of power, because what you missed in there was that cannabis wasn't giving you any experience that wasn't already inside of you, right? But there's something blocking it. And now your real work is getting curious and figuring out what belief system, what story, what societal pressure, what family pressure, what in there is preventing me from feeling the ecstasy and euphoria I felt in that plant medicine experience every minute of every day. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused. And there's no guidance out there on this stuff. So I don't blame people for being like, what? Like, what the hell are you doing? And so, one thing that I tell people a lot is that a good cue for if you're dependent on cannabis, because some people might be listening and going, well, I'm smoking every day, but I've never really thought about it. Well, let me ask you this, right? Can you take 3 days off of it? Because if you can take a minimum of 3 days off, I would say per week, you can ensure that it doesn't own you, because anything you can't take 3 days off of owns you. And everyone gets to make that decision themselves if they like being owned by something or if they don't. For me, it got to a point where I did not want to need anything except my normal sober reality to be able to be happy. And so once I got to that pain point, I was able to actually go, okay, I need to take a 3-month break from cannabis. I need to take a 3-month break from everything, down to coffee, down to everything, and really handle my shit and sit in my shit and really figure out like, what are the reasons that I want to sit with cannabis? So in that time of reflection, and this goes back to like my awakening moment, because what happened was I realized that even though I was only interacting with cannabis once per night, I was interacting with like one bowl, I was vaporizing it, I was working out every day, I was doing all the right things, I was still numbing out my emotions, because I would go to this job that I wasn't extremely thrilled to be at. I would work all day and bring up all the motivation and inspiration necessary to make a change, as scary as it was, and leave that job. And then I would go home, interact with cannabis, which is a feminine medicine, which we can get into. That medicine would provide feelings of comfort for me. And then I would be like, okay, I'm content. And then the next day would start over. I'd get all frustrated, come home, and it was just a cyclical process. And so once I took those 3 months off, I started my own business. I quit my job, right? Like all these things happened because I couldn't take it anymore. I was like, there's no numbing this away. I know what I need to do now. And I think that for a lot of people, that's a big thing that they've yet to realize is like, what are you numbing out with this plant? Because it can do that.
Absolutely. And this is at its best, there is always a moment, almost always a moment on this show where somebody says, there I was in this office job, or I was on this path towards this life that I had thought I wanted. And then I decided to make a hard right turn or left turn and started this and did that. And so I want to open that up a little bit with the benefit of hindsight. Talk to me about what you were already doing which pointed you to where you are now, and what you missed and how you missed it. Because really, the people that are listening to this that are going to benefit from this, whether or not they're interested in plant medicine, are the people who probably are in that job now. And whether it's a 6-pack of Budweiser or a bowl vaporized or whatever that they're doing every night to get themselves level or whatever you want to call it, talk me through what was going on then and maybe some of the signs that you wished you would have seen maybe sooner.
Yeah. And it's funny because I saw all the signs and I take full ownership over it. Like I knew exactly what I wanted to do. It was just so scary that I would go home every night and numb it out because part of me didn't believe I could do it. And that part of me was not really me. It was a voice that I was unconsciously listening to and identifying with. And so what happened was after my father
What were you
passed,
doing?
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
Go
no,
ahead.
no, you're good. So after my father passed away, I knew I wanted to get into the cannabis industry, and we can dive into his story because it's really powerful too, where a lot of people ask me, Ryan, why are you even in cannabis? Like, why cannabis? Why not psilocybin? Why not LSD? I've had incredible experiences with all of these medicines. I've also had very challenging experiences with a lot of these medicines.
Sure.
But why it's cannabis is because my father and I were a very, very like best friends, right? And same with my mother too. We've always been very close. And when I was 19, I woke up one morning and peed blood and didn't know why. And at this point, I was unhealthy. I was a typical teenager. I was smoking cigarettes. I was drinking, not crazy amounts because I never liked alcohol that much, but I was just, going with the punches, eating hot fries and all the Celeste pizzas and all this stuff. And so when I went to the hospital with him, he had kind of known that I was interacting with cannabis, but he didn't know like how much or if I was interacting with anything else. And so he asked me, are you doing drugs? I need to know. Like, we're on the way to the hospital. Like, is this a drug thing?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I'm not interacting with anything except a lot of cannabis. And I saw him have a sigh of relief. And so I was like, that's interesting because my dad was like a very sober guy. Like he'd smoke cigarettes and that was it. And steak and cheese subs. That was his high. And so when we went to the hospital, I started showing him all these videos I've been watching about new science coming out with cannabis. And so he just didn't have any cognitive dissonance over it. He was like, wow, I guess back in the 70s, they just didn't know what they didn't know. And so he was like, hey, you're in school, you're doing the stuff, you're in school for psychology, you have a job. Cool. If you want to do this, you can do it in the house. It's fine. I would rather you do it there than have to like drive or do anything like that. So we started bonding over it. And eventually I ended up going to cannabis school with his help. And he ended up joining me and going to school with me. And it was this institute that opened near my house and it was really fun. And he was just thoroughly like excited to learn what I was into because he was always like that. He'd bring me to metal shows and sit in the parking lot for hours where these death metal bands would play. Yeah. It was probably hilarious for him.
He's a good dad, man. You had a good dad. He was a great
dad. He was the best, And it was funny because when we started going there, he was just, this is where I get a lot of my talkingness from because he was just the life of the party everywhere he went. And so we started meeting a lot of people that would come in that had cancer that were healing their own cancer with RSO, which stands for Rick Simpson oil, or its real name, FECO, full extract cannabis oil.
Sure. And it's like super concentrated.
Right? Yeah. And for people listening, like this might be a little alarming for you if you've never heard like cannabis can cure cancer. There are PubMed studies out on this. So for anyone who's like, I don't believe this, just look it up. I have no intention to try to sway you into these things. I saw it with my own eyes. That's the only reason I believed it because I didn't believe it at first either. So after I got through that school and I'm interning there and working there and these kind of things, my father got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so, I had a moment where I knew he wasn't going to take treatment. I knew he wasn't going to change the way he was living. And so I chose in that moment to love him for who he was and where he was, right? And where he was at. And instead of trying to change him based on what my beliefs were of how he was supposed to die, what age he was supposed to be, all of these things. And so through that time, he started experiencing some pain. And like I said, he wasn't going to do radiation and chemo because he had just finished bringing his brother for 3 years every week to Dana-Farber to get cancer treatment. So he had seen the progression of what these things had done to his brother. And he was like, I'm not going through that. I'd rather go out with my dignity and my hair because he had a great head of hair. And so,
so do you, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, man. That's where I get it from. I was so glad I got my dad's side, not my mom's side. They have very thin straw hair.
But me too.
Yeah. I feel like, as a side note, you only get one or the other. You get the great beard or you get the great hair. I'm glad I got the hair. I grow a great goatee. I get a good goatee, but like this side doesn't really grow in as good as this side, but I'm glad I got the hair side, And so
I hope you take this the right way, but you look like you'd be at home at an orgy.
Oh, dude.
Like you look like you could walk in, like you own the place and everybody be like, yep, he checks out. Like,
yes. I think the height helps with that too, because I'm 6'5". So most people are like,
get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. Most people are like, you're tall. And I'm like, I know, trust me, my head feels it. I hit my head on everything. So, so that side too. Yeah. So when I started treating him with RSO because he was experiencing some pain, I would sit with him because he hadn't tried cannabis since the 70s, where him and his wife at the time, they had smoked a joint and then heard a cop siren some far away place. And they got scared and hid under the table with the blinds closed for like 8 hours. So that was his like experience that he was bringing back to. So he was like, can you sit with me? I'm like, sure. So we started sitting together. And through that time, we got to desensitize the subject of his death. And I got to, connect with him on a level that I had never connected with him before. And I got to hear stories that I had never heard before. I got to watch him make amends with his grandchildren. I got to watch him make amends with his other children, with my mother, with his own mortality. Someone who was so nervous about the concept of death was then asking me in a very calm way, like, what do you think happens when you die? And so instead of becoming this horrible event, right, which it was in a lot of ways, I mean, I wish my dad was still here, but it became this kind of adventure where he got excited about the next step of his evolution. And my dad wasn't exactly a religious or spiritual person. He believed in a higher power, but it really allowed us to connect on this thing and really got me more into like, where is he going to go? Where do I think he's going to go? Let me start looking into spirituality. And so once he passed, I started realizing like, wow, not only did this plant help me with my anxiety when I was 16, and I tried every pharmaceutical under the sun at the recommendation of doctors, none of them worked, and cannabis helped me connect with myself. But watching how it helped me connect with my father and deal with his death and grieve through that process, I realized this is what I want to do in my life. And at that point, like I said, I had a psychology background. So I understood, I was starting to link a lot of things together. And so from there, I ended up working at a dispensary for 5 years. And so through that time, at first, when I started working there, we had this owner who started the business. And this is extremely rare in the cannabis world. Most people that own these businesses, it was just the latest projection of what was going to make them money next. And so there they are, right? And so no judgment on that. That's one way to do it. But this guy, he was in New York when 9/11 happened. And he was running through the streets, almost got killed. It was a really challenging experience for him. And he had really bad PTSD as a result. And the only thing that helped him was cannabis. And so he vowed that when it became legal, he would invest in a dispensary. And so that was the first owner of our business. And this guy was amazing. I mean, he treated us so amazing. If there was snow, like a big snowstorm, he'd be like, hey, you guys get the day off. I'll pay you. He did a lot of things that really made us feel like a family. And we were one of the smallest dispensaries in the state. We had all the genetics, like the best growers. Everything was just amazing there. And we were this really boutique dispensary that even though we didn't have all the millions of dollars that big places had, we really had connection with our clients and with our patients. And so after a certain amount of time, he wasn't exactly cut out for that business. It's a very cutthroat industry and it's very stressful. And so he ended up having to get a new pacemaker because of how stressed he was. So he ended up selling the business. And the company he sold it to, not to talk bad about them because I'm really grateful for them because they led me to where I am today. But they just didn't, they weren't in alignment with what I was feeling. And everyone there, many people left or got fired right off the bat. And the vibe there changed a lot. And so right away, I knew I don't want to be here anymore. And so through that time, though, I was going home, I was interacting with cannabis to numb that out. And I was getting other opportunities to be head grower at these new dispensaries opening, but none of them really felt right. And it just felt more logical than heart-centered. And by the time I finally got to December of 2019, I ended up going to this big cannabis convention out in Las Vegas called MJ BizCon. And my partner, who I met at the dispensary, her and I and my buddy Devin, who now actually has his own delivery service here in Boston in the legal industry, we decided, you know what, screw this place. We're going to go out there. They won't listen to us. So we're going to go out there. We're going to find our own investors and we're going to bring the real cannabis culture to the world. And so we go out there and it was just a bunch of Chad and Brad's, right? Like a bunch of people, like how many grams per square foot can you create, right? Like how much money can you make me, right? Like how cheap can we possibly do your system? Like things that just weren't in alignment with me. So the last night I was there, my girlfriend and I was like, hey, what do you want to do? It was kind of a dark night of the soul for us because a dream was burning in front of us. And she was like, can we go to the strip club? And I was like, say no more. I had never been to one ever in my life, neither has she.
That's funny.
I was like, best girlfriend award ever. And so we ended up taking a small dose of MDMA, went to the strip club, had this beautiful experience. We're talking to the strippers. They're telling us their life goals. Like we're just having a blast.
Sure.
And we lost track of time. At the time, Rachel was working on a 600-page application for an Illinois dispensary, actually.
Wow.
And a very office supplies type task, right? Like it's very boring to do that. And so she was really overwhelmed and she was like, okay, I'll work on the plane home. I'll get a head start. It'll all work out. Well, we ended up staying there till 8 a.m. And so we were getting on a plane at 1. So we were supposed to leave around 3. We just both lost track of time. I was the one tasked with it, so I take ownership over losing track of time. But when we left, she went through this real challenging experience where she was like, how am I going to get it done? Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And in that moment, I was coming down off MDMA and I empathized with her. And I really saw like, wow, like I really feel for her. Like I imagine I know what that feels like. And that really sucks. And I realized in that moment that I hadn't done that in a long time, that all I was trying to do was numb my feelings out. And in that moment, it all just crashed home. And I was like, oh my God, it's my relationship with cannabis. It's me. It's completely how I'm interacting with it. And I saw it all. And what I choose to believe, because I really feel that happened in that moment, is even though I wasn't interacting with cannabis on this plane ride home, the plant was talking to me and being like, I've tried to tell you these things, but it might be time to take a break from me for a while because I don't think you really have a positive relationship with me. And so I went home and I followed that thread, followed the breadcrumb trail, and stopped interacting with cannabis for 3 months. And literally right away, it was like, I cannot go to this job anymore. Like it's soul sucking. And so I ended up quitting the job, starting my own business, starting the podcast, all terrifying stuff, by the way.
Yeah.
But I just knew, I'm like, well, it's way more terrifying staying here for the next even year and not fulfilling my purpose, not fulfilling what my heart is calling me for. And so that's really what started me on this journey, and kind of the process that no matter if you're in plant medicines or whatnot, I imagine everyone listening can relate this story to a time in your life right now, or a time in your life that you went through this hero's journey, right? Where you were refusing the call for a long time, and then finally you answered it. And even though it's challenging, you're just like so charged up. And that's really what it is. I imagine too, like when you do what you love, it's not that it's easy, but life is going to challenge you regardless. So you get to choose if it's going to challenge you for what you do want in life or what you don't want. And that's a choice that everyone gets to make for themselves. I chose in that moment to start having it challenge me for what I do want.
That's all amazing. So let's take a second and take a step back from cannabis and talk to me about regenerative farming, because I want to get to the cannabis and your particular expertise. But just for background, for folks that are listening at home, because I think this is a really important thing. And so talk to me a little bit about regenerative farming and why it's important.
Yeah. Regenerative farming is the practice of creating a farming structure that is not detrimental to the world. Because what a lot of people might not realize right now is that our topsoils are depleted. And so therefore,
shout out to Sadhguru, by the way.
Yes,
He's like riding around the world on a motorcycle talking about the soil to people.
He's crushing it. I mean, what an amazing unit of a man. Yeah. And, it's funny because a lot of people talk about how, you might see these stats online every once in a while. A head of lettuce today only has 1/5 the nutrients that it did 30 years ago. Well, why is that happening? Well, nutrients are in the soil. And so therefore, if the soils are depleted, then the plants that are being grown don't have enough micronutrients. And then the animals that eat those plants are then nutrient deficient as well. And then we eat those animals and we are constantly nutritionally deficient unless we're really supplementing and doing all of these things. And we're fast approaching a time where you will not be able to be fully satisfied unless you're taking supplementation. And I think that's really challenging, because even if you're an organic farm and you're doing everything perfectly, say you're a 50 or 100 acre farm, well, guarantee there's a 12 to 15,000 acre farm down the road that's doing it with pesticides and fungicides and herbicides and rodenticides, and all of that through the wind trail is being blown over to your farm. And so that's why I tell a lot of people that even organic food now is being tainted with glyphosate, because glyphosate is one of the main detriments that people are using. And it's in Roundup. They're essentially using it to quell pests and stuff. But the whole idea is that one of the main reasons this is happening is because of monoculturing. And so what monoculturing is like you have a 10,000 acre farm that's just growing corn, right? And so what happens is in nature, you have a lot of diversity within the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom and whatnot. And so everything balances itself out. And so when you only have corn there and then you get a pest like aphids, well, there's no natural predators around to keep those aphids away. And so what do they need to do then? Well, what they're thinking they need to do anyway is use these things like glyphosate or any of these pesticides, rodenticides, et cetera, to be able to quell that aphid infestation. But what happens is then they're not only hurting the ecosphere, but they're also poisoning our food. And at the same time, they're using, the reason the topsoils specifically are depleted is because they're using salt-based nutrients. And so these nutrients are very toxic to the soil. And essentially what they're doing, it's almost like eating food versus being on a feeding tube, where like if you're eating food, right, when you're full. But if you're on a feeding tube, you have to be really careful how much food you put in there, because you could like hypothetically explode. I don't literally mean explode, but like you guys get the analogy, I imagine, right? Where like you could have a really challenging experience.
Sure.
And so with these chemical salt nutrients, they're killing off the microbial life in the soils. And the microbes are actually like, there's this beautiful, beautiful, analogy I use for the romance that is nature, right? Which is basically like when you're growing a plant, the roots of that plant release what's called exudates, which are essentially sugars, right? And the microbes really want these sugars. So think about like you wanting a partner, you being attracted to someone, right? And this partner saying, well, if you want to go on a date with me, you got to do this, right? And so it's this fun flirtatious game that these exudates and these microbes play, where these exudates are like, well, we'll give you what you want, but you got to get us calcium or magnesium or phosphorus or potassium or nitrogen, right? And so the microbes go, okay. And they run out and they grab it and they bring it back to the roots, and the roots go, all right, now you can have some of my exudate, right? The microbes feed on that. And then they go, well, now we need, if you want more of it, we need this. And so there's this constant back and forth between the bacteria and the fungi and the soil. And this is really what the soil food web's all about. And there's all these different, creatures and critters and everything that live there that all have this synergistic play. And so you can see that, like, for instance, if you're in an organic regenerative system and you have polyculture, which is like your cannabis is growing with tomatoes, pepper plants, you have all your stuff, bees around, all this stuff, then say if, one plant gets infected with, say, spider mites, well, then if you have these companion plants around and these things that allow your natural predators to have a food source when spider mites aren't there, well, then those natural predators are going to go, oh my God, lunch, and they're going to go eat the spider mites. And now you don't need to use glyphosate or any of these things to keep that stuff away. And so it's really this big mind fuck of humans essentially thinking they're smarter than nature and thinking that without chemical salts, they're not going to be able to harvest anything. Well, if you look into dragonfly earth medicine or any of these like really big regenerative entities, they are not only like creating the same yield in whatever they're growing, whether it be corn, cannabis, whatever, they're exceeding it, and it's sustainable. Because essentially what the style of farming, like conventional farming, is doing is essentially thinking that this experience of life is a sprint, not a marathon. And they're not going to be leaving anything for our children, our grandchildren, and their, children, et cetera, to have left. And there's this tipping point,
Yeah, and it seems like we're very close to it.
We are extremely close to it.
The thing I just wanted to interject is it seems like the theme, and I could tie this to a bunch of stuff that's not food too. Ever since like the Industrial Revolution, the theme has been to like strip things down to this one singular thing. And in some cases that's food, whether it's, 1,000 acres of corn. In other cases, it's like, oh, we found that if you reduce this one molecule and you put it into a pill, then it does this one thing. And then you find out about the entourage effect and how much. So it seems like finally now, through guys like you, and, there's Kyle Kingsbury out there, there's all these folks out there that are preaching about stuff like this. You can see the web. I see it through all of our culture of like people get reduced down to this very one, single thing that maybe they're very effective in that sprint, but because of the lack of diversity, it's very hard to sustain. So now take that to marijuana. So what? Because I think for a lot of folks listening to this at home, we have access to what we have access to. So what's different about ethically grown or sustainable cannabis?
Yeah. So I'll go on two different types of, I won't call them tangents, but two different sides of the coin. So we'll go quantitative first, and then we'll move into the qualitative, because the quantitative can be measured. And for a lot of people, they're in their left brain. Science is kind of a religion these days. So I'll speak to that first, and then I'll lead more into like the spiritual components of ethically grown cannabis.
Sure.
So first of all, there's a lot of constituents and compounds within the cannabis plant that make up the totality of the experience that is cannabis. And like you were saying, kind of like the ethos of these pharmaceutical companies, where they're not all bad. I'm not going to say that pharmaceuticals are bad objectively, but I think one of the areas they've missed is essentially they're going on the belief system of outlaw the natural to monopolize the synthetic. And so
100%.
We know with cannabis that ethically grown cannabis will never cause cancer in your body, even if you're smoking it, right? And there's other complications that come with smoking cannabis, right? That I can dive into and why I choose to vaporize. But unlike cigarettes, which isn't even really tobacco, but unlike a lot of things that you can smoke that can give you cancer, ethically grown cannabis is not one of them. And I actually have a theory that what we're going to start seeing is cannabis causing cancer, because they're putting these same things that they're putting into cigarettes now into this type of factory farm cannabis. But, one of the things that I look at a lot is that a lot of people right now are obsessed with Delta 9 THC. And they think that that's the thing. Like when I worked at the dispensary, people will come in, what's your highest THC? I'm like, do you want to know what it's going to give you? Nope. I just want the best bang for my buck. And they think the best bang for their buck is going to come from the numbers, And it's this challenge, because when you're growing, in typical soils, right? Like salt-based nutrient systems, bacterially dominant soils, what you're going to get is a higher amount of delta 9 THC potentially, right? Not all the time, but like that's the potential. But you're losing out on a lot of the secondary metabolites like terpenes, other cannabinoids, et cetera, within the cannabis plant that are also very healing. And it's a kind of double-edged sword because on the one hand, people think that THC is all you want. So therefore, the dispensaries are like, well, we got to give people what they want. So there's this re-education that's necessary. And I think that's what I'm so passionate about is allowing people to realize like, hey, just because something has, say, 14% delta 9 THC, which for anyone listening is probably like, fuck that. Well, what about THCP, for instance, right? Which is a new cannabinoid that's only just been found. That's literally about 50 times more able to bind to CB1 receptors in the brain and nervous system. And so the CB1 receptor, yeah, exactly. It gets you higher. Thank you. Yeah. And so if you walk by a strain that's maybe a landrace strain, say 11 to 14% THC, if you're only looking for delta 9, you'll be like, fuck that. But maybe it has a high amount of THCP and that will be the strongest strain you've ever smoked. So there's this confusion around it because again, no one's really out. I mean, there are people out there talking about this, but it's very far and few between. And so what can happen when you start growing in more fungally dominant systems like regenerative agriculture and Korean natural farming can bring forth are higher amounts of secondary metabolites, higher amounts of terpene expression, and higher amounts of terpenes, because terpenes are essentially the essential oils of the cannabis plant, and they're triggered as an immune response to the plant's roots being attacked by microbes. Remember that interaction I was telling you about? Well, as the plant has more and more diversity of microbes in the soil, there's going to be more and more need for expression of different terpenes, right? So as a result, you get these wild different scents and smells. And, I won't go into the whole idea of the olfactory system, but I mean, smell is a sense for a reason, right? Like, and taste and smell are very closely linked. And so one of the things I always do before I interact with cannabis is I grind it up and then I actually smell it to prime my olfactory system first. The same way that you warm up before you go do a deadlift, your body's gonna be like, what the hell? Where is all this weight coming from, right? You warm up, so your body's like, oh, get ready, batten down the hatches, something's about to happen. And so priming the olfactory system is a way to romance not only yourself, but also the cannabis plant too, and start connecting with it at a deeper level. Because what cannabis is not simply the intoxicating effects. Because if anyone's interacted with CBD dominant flower that has 0.3% of delta 9 THC or lower, you realize that a lot of what you think the experience of cannabis is still there without the delta 9. It's still very psychoactive. It's just not intoxicating. So there's that difference there. And yesterday I podcasted with a guy named Len May, who takes this one step even further into the quantitative measures, where he goes, hey, everyone's endocannabinoid system is different and everyone's epigenetic expressions are different on a cellular level. And so he actually does DNA testing through EndoDNA, his company, where you can actually dive in and figure out what your specific individual system is in reference to or in resonance with cannabis. So maybe you find that you have a mutation, say in the AKT1 gene. Well, that tells you right off the bat that things that are intoxicating within the cannabis plant, like delta 9 THC, might not be right for you because you can induce psychosis and anxiety and paranoia and these types of things. You'd be more prone to them. On the other hand, you might find that your endocannabinoids, right, 2-AG and anandamide, which anandamide is the bliss molecule, are in abundance in your body already. And so maybe you've tried cannabis and you're like, I just doesn't really feel like I need it. Well, it could be because you already have such an abundance that you would be better off if you choose to interact with cannabis going for a CBD dominant strain. Right. That's not going to intoxicate you. On the other hand, you might find that you have a low amount of endocannabinoids. And maybe that's why you love cannabis. So it gives so much more direction and credibility to the cannabis experience, because now we start realizing that cannabis is not objective, right? Like we were talking about earlier. Everyone's experience is different, and it's based on not only your physiology, but also the whole spiritual and emotional and mental component of you as well, which we'll get into in a second. But when we're interacting and really allowing us to dive into this quantitative measure of cannabis, we start noticing that, wow, there's a lot more stuff going on here than we thought. And if we allow the soil to do what soil does, and what we do is just bring the right amendments and constituents together to create essentially mimic the forest floor, then even if we're growing inside, we can get a much higher quality of cannabis. And if we are growing inside, and this is another whole rabbit hole that we can go down if you want to, if we're growing inside, we have EMFs and all of this electricity getting uploaded into this plant. So how do we counteract that? Well, we use modalities like biogeometry, which actually balance out our environment. A funny way that I describe biogeometry is it's kind of like feng shui's older brother, where feng shui looks at like how your furniture is arranged and things like that. Biogeometry actually looks at the colors, the shapes, the textures, and the direction of orientation within your space. And it has these little shapes that can balance that out for you. And there are wearables that I wear, but you can also apply this to your grower. And I believe I'm the first person to do this with cannabis. Now, there is one guy doing this in Sweden with hemp, which is how I figured it out. And hemp really is cannabis. I think they're really synonymous, but I think I'm one of the first people to do this. And so if anyone listening is like, I grow cannabis and I want to learn about that, hit me up. I can tell you exactly how to do it. It's not a complicated process whatsoever. If you want to understand it, that gets complicated, but just to get it in there, it's pretty simple. But we start realizing like, oh, if we just essentially, it's the same thing with self-development. If we get ourselves out of the way enough, right, by meditation and things like that, and allow the voices to quell, then the whisper of our heart can come through. And so very similar to growing cannabis, the more that we can get ourselves out of the way and just imitate nature and let nature do its thing, the better cannabis we're going to get. And so the other side of this is qualitative measures. Now, this is harder to measure, but what shamanic medicine says is that when you're interacting with any plant, right, cannabis being the one we'll focus on today, but when you're interacting with a plant, you're interacting with a level of consciousness of the grower who grew it. And so if this person is in anxiety, they're worried about paying their rent, maybe they're growing it illegally and they're paranoid, and then you're interacting with that medicine, there's a great chance that if you're not aware enough of like, whoa, I'm feeling something that's not really mine right now, that you will have a ordeal instead of an experience. And then you'll end up externalizing onto the plant and going, cannabis makes me paranoid. I can never do that again. So this is the argument for why I'm creating Grow with Cannabis, because I really feel that in order to get the full experience of what cannabis has to offer, we must cultivate it ourselves. And if you've ever read Don Juan, right, The Adventures of Don Juan, they talk about this in the, I don't know if it's the first book, it's the purple one, but they talk about how the Yaqui Indians, when he goes down there to meet Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda, he goes down there and he starts learning about these medicines they're using, which for him, it was the weed and the smoke. And the weed wasn't actually cannabis. It was some other plant. But he was talking about how everyone in their tradition has one of these plants that becomes their ally. And the only way to do it, they can't smoke someone else's weed, right? They can't smoke someone else's, smoke mix. They have to grow it themselves. And so one of his adventures that you read about in the book is him going out and going out by himself. No one knows where he is and growing his own weed. Now, it's not cannabis. It's just, they call it the weed. I forget exactly what plant it is. But the idea that like by sharing our energy with these plants are therefore made for us. And so one of the first things I do when I'm planting a seed is I put it in my mouth and I inoculate it with my own microbiome. It's the same way of like when someone is pregnant, they're speaking to their baby even before it's born and they're connecting with it beforehand. And mothers are so great at this. And it's really fascinating because, what I've experienced as a result of doing these types of things and working with nature rather than against it and all of the stuff is so profound. I don't even have words for it. I mean, it's literally ridiculous. And when I've shared my cannabis with people like Paul Chek and, people like this that are, units, like that guy would be able to pull something out right away. He's like, I don't know what you're doing to this, but this is incredible. I've never had this experience before. And so it's very fascinating because, again, correlation does not necessarily equal causation. I come from a psychological background, but there's a strong correlation to working with nature and growing in an organic system and using biogeometry and getting ourselves out of the way and having a much higher quality experience. Now, the other thing is that by high quality experience, I don't mean getting the highest you've ever gotten. I don't mean any of that, because I think something that changes when you start looking at cannabis consciously is that the high is not what you're looking for anymore. Because I think that's where I started with cannabis. I was like smoking it as much as I could to be like, how high can I get?
Right.
And what changed for me is now I'm looking to have the minimum effective dose to get the result of what the high brings, which is a deep awareness and connection to myself, to those around me, to the important work I do in the world, to the world around me, and what curiosities I have as my intention going into the experience. So I could care less about the high. Sometimes I interact with CBD dominant flower because I don't want the intoxicating effects, but I want to communicate with the plant and allow it to act as a medicine and teacher in my life, the same way that we work with a mentor, to be able to kind of show me where I'm getting stuck in life right now. And then, like I said earlier, the real work begins when I come out of the experience and I start integrating, because these medicines, they can show you the what, but it's up to you and your end of the bargain to figure out the how. And so maybe in an experience, you have an intention of figuring out why you're blocked in your creative expression. And when you go into this experience, you start having these visions of how excited you were when you were a kid and you were painting. And so you build up all this inspiration in the experience. You're like, I'm going to start painting tomorrow. Well, if you come out of that experience and you don't actually figure out the how by going to the store, getting the easel, getting the everything necessary for painting, getting the paint kit and everything, then essentially you're just going to feel like you need more cannabis to access that same creativity again. Where in reality, if you go out and you buy that paint kit and you start painting, then at some point you're going to have a PEEK peak experience, which is really what I think the goal is of these plant medicine experiences. It's not the PEAK peak experience where you're like, oh my God, I'm on the medicine, I feel amazing. It's when your life can start resembling the magic you feel in a plant medicine experience without any medicine necessary. And that's where I say your life itself becomes the psychedelic experience. Where when you were a kid, right? Like if you look at kids, it's like they're like, I had this realization. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like you're watching someone come out of an extremely slow DMT experience over like 10 years, right? Like that's what you're watching. So why do they have that and so many adults don't? Well, it's not because we can't have it. It's because we started getting boxed in and we started knowing things. And when we know things, if someone else doesn't agree with us, we need to convince them that they need to agree with our version of reality and all this stuff that gets us jumbled. And eventually, like I say this often, I think part of our life is growing up and the other part is becoming a child again. I think that's really how life goes if we want to find happiness. It's like being able to feel like a kid, but still drive a car and cook your own food and buy your own dinner, right? Like it's the perfect balance of both. And so I think that's like really what I would say in terms of quantitative versus qualitative and what I've experienced as a result. And what I'll say is like my experiences are simply my experiences. They're not the right or wrong way. I'm not into that whatsoever. My goal is to give awareness to these things. So if someone listening goes, that's interesting, go try it out for yourself and see if it works for you, because you have your own reality, you have your own world. There's no right or wrong within how to interact with cannabis or any of these plant medicines. There's certain things that people have passed down that I learn and I reverberate that have helped me. But again, try these out for yourself. We are all our own scientists. And I think that's where science can become fun again. Like when we were in third grade and had the planetarium, not so much the science that we think of today when we think of all the butting heads and all the clashing views and everything like that.
Today's show is brought to you by High Level CRM. High Level is an all-in-one platform designed to help entrepreneurs grow their businesses without the need for multiple softwares or an IT team. Not only does their easy-to-use software allow you to track and manage your leads throughout each phase of the relationship, but it also allows you to build funnels, track stats, and more. Guys, I sat down and added up the cost of software I was able to replace with just one app, and it was over $1,000 per month. Because this is an all-in-one application, I also save a ton of headaches connecting apps and building automations, and the team at Go High Level does a great job of getting you started quickly and easily when you sign on. I cannot more highly recommend these guys. Right now, Spear and Clover listeners get a free 14-day trial of High Level CRM for themselves. Click the link in our show notes to support the show and get started on your free 14-day trial today. I'm super excited that today's show is brought to you by the Global School of Entrepreneurship. Most practicing entrepreneurs cannot take 2 years away from their growing business to attend a full-time campus-based program or spend every weekend away from family and business for a couple of years. Finally, there's an accredited program specifically designed for you to work on and grow your business while completing your MBA. The GSE MBA complements the needs and schedules of someone actively engaged in an entrepreneurial venture while still covering the accredited curriculum expected from any MBA program. The Global School of Entrepreneurship offers a unique offering called the Mastermind to MBA program. It consists of 10 students who work together in a forum-style cohort and meet every other week for a year. The GSE MBA helps you develop skills in critical thinking and strategic planning. Students also develop competencies in leadership, decision-making, and communication with both employees as well as the important stakeholders in your business. You will be exposed to world-class academics and fascinating guest lecturers. You'll work on your business while working in your business. Students are guided by real-world entrepreneurs with decades of experience starting and scaling businesses just like yours. Best of all, I'm beyond proud to announce that the Global School of Entrepreneurship has agreed to offer one Spear and Clover listener a scholarship to join an upcoming Mastermind to MBA cohort. They are looking for someone just like you to bring a unique perspective to the program, and they are accepting applications right now. To learn more and to apply, simply go to www.gse.mba/spear. That's www.gse.mba/spear. Don't miss this opportunity to level yourself up and surround yourself with other like-minded entrepreneurs just like you. Once again, to apply for the GSE MBA Spear and Clover Scholarship, simply visit www.gse.mba/spear. That's www.gse.mba/spear. Today's show is brought to you by Scaling with Media. I mean, literally, like if it weren't for the folks at Scaling with Media, you would not be getting this. Scaling with Media is a truly revolutionary company for any entrepreneur who wants to reach a larger audience without taking on the years of experience necessary to master the required skills. These guys do it all. From helping you develop your creative plan to editing, sourcing content, copywriting, ads management, and way more. Whether you're looking to launch a YouTube channel or podcast, or you just want to scale your business out to more eyeballs, these guys are the absolute best one-stop shop. But that's not all. Right now, Spear and Clover listeners who sign up for their brand launch package will receive a free, that's right, free professional grade studio kit that I'm actually recording right now on. The studio kit includes a professional microphone, stand, lighting, and headphones, and is worth well over $500. Take action now by going to scalingwithmedia.com/spear and claim your free studio kit. Again, that's scalingwithmedia.com/spear, scalingwithmedia.com/spear. Now back to the show. Yeah, so there's so much to unpack there. But first of all, it's hard for me to imagine anybody coming from an approach of love and introspection and seeking, kind of engaging with any drug in that manner and not having a positive result. Like, I don't, maybe crystal meth. I don't know about crystal meth. But like, I can imagine there's some guy out there who would be like, I think it's Dr. Corey Hart or whatever, would be out there like, you got to do a little bit of heroin, but you got to do it like this. So don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating that, but listening to you talk about it, it's like, well, yeah, because you took care of yourself and your reasoning and your intent, and then you went down that path. And to that point, you know, you were labeling a lot of stuff qualitative at the end there. And frankly, I think quantitatively, you can tie back so much. You can tell when food was made with love. And that doesn't mean that there's a spirit in the food, to me at least. That doesn't mean that, you know, you can tell the difference when you go to yoga and somebody sages the room. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a sage guy, but I know when somebody loves their place in the universe and the work that they're doing, and it is meaningful to them and it's meaningful to the people that participate in it. And so if you're listening to this and you're still, you know, like, I don't know about this cannabis stuff, it could be the bike shop where the guy just, you know, whistles a song all day while he's fixing your bike, and you get on that bike and it's like balanced for you and it's perfect for you. There's so much benefit and joy that can be had with somebody that really loves what they're doing. The other point I want to make is I think you know more about cannabis than I know about anything. And so I'm just, you know, it's my job to sit on this side of the microphone and try to think about that person. And I know a little bit about cannabis, right? So is there a cause or a reason to have maybe some sort of like, you know, there's like Whole30 approved foods. Is there, because there's no way that your average person is going to get to understand the THCP, THC, Delta 9, and all the different things that you talked about, which I was able to kind of follow, but how do you take your message, which maybe has a prerequisite of knowledge? How do you take your message and extrapolate it out so that people in the places where this is legal can benefit?
Yes. And one thing I'll touch on real quick, what you're mentioning about the food being, you know, made with love and things like that, is because we're in a left brain society. I know this can be challenging for a lot of people to think about anything that can't be necessarily measured. But the first thing is that science says that we only see 4% of visible reality. So that means that 96% of what is known to be there, we can't see anyway. And so an analogy I use to bring this home is that I imagine that everyone listening to this has love for someone in their life. And I imagine that they also have love for someone else. Well, can you measure in units of love how much love you have for someone versus someone else? No, but yet you can still feel that you love them, right? And so just because we can't measure them does not mean it doesn't exist. It also means that maybe one day we will be able to measure units of love. Who knows, right? The light bulb was crazy until now it's in every house, right? So a lot of times the mystery today is tomorrow's scientific discovery, and it doesn't make it any less magical. I think that's where science and spirituality get both butting heads a lot, because science is like, we need to understand it and measure it. Spirituality is like, it's pure magic. You don't want to measure it. And it's like, what if it's both? What if science is magic? And what if spirituality is magic, and bring them together as alchemy did, right? The ancient practice of alchemy actually goes, whoa, okay, we can explain how a light bulb works, but it's still magic that works, And so I think that we're having a renaissance right now, slowly but surely, science and spirituality joining hands again, because I think they're really two sides of the same coin. And I think that, going on your question, an easy way to take any of the information I've had and bring it down to ground level and start experimenting with this yourself is a 3-step process that I have for bringing your relationship with cannabis into the conscious. And then I have 3 ways to understand cannabis too that I'll go in after. But the basic steps to this are, the first step is you want to take your power back in your relationship with cannabis. And so this step infuses the concepts of intention and ceremony. So intention is giving the plant a direction to work within. And when I get into the ways to understand cannabis, you'll see why this is so important, specifically with cannabis, but really with any plant medicine. And so your intention could be simply, I want to be happier on the other side of this. I want to experience real happiness. I want to feel more connected to someone around me. I have a question that I can't really figure out, right? Like, can you help me with that answer? It does, like, a lot of times intention is looked at as this, I have to become an infinite starseed and soar the nebula galaxy. It doesn't have to be that. It can be that if you want it to, but it can be simple, right? So for people listening, if you're not really into spirituality, just practice with, like, hey, I have this challenge at work with a coworker. Like, can you help me see what I might be missing there? Like, it could literally be anything. And so then your ceremony is the container from which your intention can play out within. So we know about the concept of set and setting. So if you set an intention to feel more connected to your partner, and then you go to a gigantic concert where it's loud and you can't really connect with them, well, you're probably not going to be able to have that intention play out so well. And so what is the ceremonial structure that's going to allow your intention to play out better? So some easy ways to do this for me that I tell people is, first, you want to make sure your set and setting. Your set is your mindset, right? So you want to make sure that you actually have space available to have this experience. If you're stressed out, whatever, you might want to down regulate, do some breath work, meditate, get yourself into a space where you have space available. Because if you're all encompassed in your being and then you invite another voice into you, it's just too many cooks in the kitchen. And so a lot of people, that's where they mess up right there. So after you've realized you have space available, tune in, make an intention, and then have a setting that is conducive for that intention to play out within. So normally what I say is, make sure it's a safe space, somewhere you're comfortable. Don't make it a new scenario right off the bat. Of course, when you get experienced with these things, you can figure out your own way of doing it. But, in terms of like training wheel style, what I like to do and what I coach my clients in is have it somewhere in your house, right? Create a ceremonial space by either having biogeometry in there, burning sage and Palo Santo. Sage cleanses your space of all energy, and then Palo Santo actually brings new positive energy into it. And so doing things like that, and then also creating sacred space by doing something like a 7-directional prayer, where essentially what you're doing is you're saying thanks to each of the 7 directions: north, east, south, west, up, down, and your heart, your center. And so if anyone's looking for more information on that, you can find scripts online you can read, but you don't need to. You could literally just say, to the north, I thank you for bringing cold days that are challenging and challenging me to be a bigger, better version of me. To the east, where the sun rises, giving us life, giving us warmth, right? So you can like literally just go based on what you know. And you can do this alone. No one's going to hear you except maybe yourself, and pretty funny sometimes. And so once you've created a ceremonial space from which your intention can play out with him, you can move on to the next step. So step number 2 is called unlocking your creative potential. And so we've heard before that cannabis can accentuate or unlock creativity. Yet we know, for anyone listening, that it's not a given. It doesn't happen every time. And so what I've tried to do is figure out a way in which we can have this happen every time. So after you've done the first step, because every one of these steps is really paramount to allow the next step to be able to unfold. So the second step of unlocking your creative potential comes down to the idea of surrender. And surrender, I use that word on purpose because I know it's a trigger word for a lot of people, because they're like, fuck that. I want my control. I don't want to surrender. Yeah. But here's the thing. Got to ask yourself why surrender is a trigger term for you. Now, what I found in my own journey, and maybe people will resonate with this, is that I didn't know why I was surrendering, what I was surrendering into, or what might be shown to me, and how I would be able to place that within my experience of life. Once you've set your intention, say to be happier, say if you surrender, right, you allow the plant to have communication through you, and you start experiencing anxiety or paranoia, right? Well, if you didn't set your intention, all of a sudden you're just experiencing these things and you're essentially a victim to them, right? There's no reason they should be happening, and just you wanted to have this nice experience, but now you're having this ordeal. Well, if you set your intention, and let's say it's happiness, then if you're experiencing this anxiety or this paranoia, you'll be able to better anchor yourself into, well, maybe I'm experiencing this because this is actually what's standing in the way of me reaching happiness in my day-to-day life. And this is what I'm ignoring by either using cannabis unconsciously, drinking, hanging out with people all the time and never being alone, etc. So it gives you an anchor from which to surrender into, because the idea of surrender is pure feminine energy. It's receiving, right? And so if we're able to fully receive, well, then we're going to get the answers to whatever we're looking for. And so a lot of times these will come in images, words, statements. Sometimes you'll come out of the experience being a little confused and you need to integrate. You need to journal for a couple of days and the meaning will come to you in due time. But I really feel humans are meaning making machines. And so there's no right or wrong answer. This is just what meaning works for you in your life. And then once you've surrendered, you've gone through your experience, you've gotten whatever messages came. Maybe you don't know what they are yet, but you got something. You can then move into step 3, which is the most important step. Without this, you're using a substance, not a medicine or a teacher. And so the third step is becoming unstoppable. And what this deals with is the concept of integration. Now, integration is not optional if you're looking to interact with plant medicines, because like I talked about in the beginning, you're disintegrating from your normal lease on reality when you interact with these medicines. And if you don't integrate, well, at best, right, you might just be like, I don't know what I got from that, and just continue hitting the button over and over again. At worst, you could enter a state of psychosis or something like that. Now, usually, unless you have a predisposition for schizophrenia or maybe that AKT1 mutation in your genetics, you're not going to experience that with cannabis. But like psilocybin, for instance, right? I mean, if you've ever taken a large dose of psilocybin, you know how easy it is to reach that point of psychosis. I've been there plenty of times. And so if you don't integrate when you come back, you could risk being there for a while, at least, let's say. And so with integration, a lot of people do it a lot of different ways. Now, I'll throw out a sacred cow right away. Most people say you got to journal. I don't like journaling, so I don't really do it that often, unless it calls to me in the moment. What I like doing is I like breath work a lot. I like breath work, and I'm talking down regulatory styles. Sometimes I use more sympathetic styles like Wim Hof, things like that. But I really like box breathing, things like that really help me to down regulate. And when you're down regulating, like when you're normally in your mind and there's thoughts going on, you have a lot of clouds up there. Let's call them white fluffy clouds. I'm not going to make a somber rainy cloud, but like a lot of white fluffy clouds. But we know that even if there's white, beautiful, fluffy clouds in the sky, what's not able to be seen as well? The sun, right? And so if you have all these white fluffy clouds in your brain and you're not down regulating, well, then there's no point for intuition or downloads or things like that to come through to you. And so by down regulating, you're allowing those clouds to part for the sun to come through. And that comes through as awarenesses, aha moments, downloads. Eileen Day McCusick calls it things dropping down in the mail slot. Everyone's had this experience before where all of a sudden they get this download of something and like, whoa, that's very interesting. So those kind of things can come through when we down regulate and we get ourselves out of the way. And so a lot of other styles I like is walking. Mark England is famous for saying walking is integration because it gives you time to be by yourself with yourself. Meditating is great. You know, there's a lot of great things that can be integration, but
Do you ever float?
So I've yet to float, which
Get
is
out of
crazy.
here.
I swear to
How
God,
is
man,
that
it's
possible?
crazy. It's like how when I told people I didn't see Fight Club until a month ago,
Yeah,
they were
get
like,
outta
what?
here.
How have you not seen Fight Club? Yeah, I watched it on a plane, which is
Bro.
probably the funniest place to watch
Yeah.
it. So it's funny, actually. I was just in Austin where it's like Float Central.
Yeah.
And I planned to float when I was there, but I didn't. So I knew like it's calling me officially now.
Yeah.
Because now I'm really like over the last 4 years, I've really become addicted to meditating. I love it.
Yeah.
And so I've heard Rogan talk about taking edibles and going in there and all that stuff. So I'm really excited to do it. But floating is another great way to do it.
You talk about set and setting. First of all, a little advice. You're 6'5". Do some research on where you go because it'll matter.
Okay.
You don't want to go to a pod. Like you want to go to like a float. They call them like float cabins. And it's basically like a giant hot tub style thing, but it's enclosed. So make sure that you look into where you go because I've been to the pod ones. And I'm 6'2", but I got long wingspan. Yeah. I like to be able to stretch out.
Yes, and man, that's what it's all about.
I'm a huge advocate of floating and I do it once a month. And you talk about set and setting, it's perfect. And you go in there with that intention. So listen, we've talked a little bit and I will talk for the record, and I might edit this out, but I will talk to you for as long as you have things to talk about. This is super interesting and I probably won't have anybody like you on that often. So
sweet.
But we have so far, I think the person who's benefited from this most is somebody maybe a little bit like me or somebody that we talk about you're using cannabis as this thing that kind of dulls you or maybe makes things feel better or, you know, temporarily removes this stress or maybe helps you with pain or whatever. Talk to me about the normcore folks, somebody who's not an alcoholic, who's not using any kind of substances, my mother, somebody who's not using substances and is doing fine. Can you give me sort of what's your pitch to them? Like why should they incorporate or try to incorporate cannabis into their life? And maybe how should they approach that first experience or their first experience since high school, maybe?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, they would have to be curious of some sort because what I've seen way too often is from the best of intentions, someone goes, dude, I love cannabis. Like, mom, you would love it. Oh my God, you have this arthritis, you have degenerative disc disease, whatever it is, right? You would love it. And so a lot of times we're coming from a really good intention of like, we want to see the people that we love find relief and have a higher quality of life. But when we're talking about psychedelics, like, I really think that not everyone is meant to interact with these medicines. And what I choose to believe is that we are infinite beings. And so we have soul contracts and we have a million lifetimes to figure whatever it is out that is the goal, which I have no idea. But, really, what I think is that sometimes in this lifetime, we can interfere with people's karma by pushing things on them that might not be right for them. Now, my strategy in human design, have you gotten into human design at all?
I don't think so, no.
Oh man, human design is a rabbit hole for everyone listening. It combines astrology, the I Ching, Kabbalah, and I believe numerology. This guy, Ra, channeled it in the 80s, essentially lost his mind for like 10 days. Everyone thought he was crazy. He did too. And he got this download of essentially like, how like you can look up like a tomato and find out exactly what the constituents of it are, or even cannabis, right? We can take the genetic profile and figure out what's in there. Well, you can deal with humans too, right? And be like, oh, depending on where you were born in relation to astrological signs or astrological placements and I Ching and all of these things, you can figure out like who you are, right? And kind of give you the blueprint of your design. And so when I really looked into my design, I'm a 5-1 projector, which like, oh, I feel attacked. No wonder I have 2 podcasts, because projectors are all about vocalizing things. And the 5 is the heretic, right? Which is going to go against everything to figure out their own truth. And the 1 is the investigator. So I want to learn everything about everything. And being a projector, I want to tell people things. But what happened a lot was that my strategy, when I figured it out, was waiting for the invitation. So what I would do before I realized this is someone who might not be interested, I would just push this on them, because I would be like, I know this will help you, right? I believe this will help you. So therefore, I'm going to push this on you and try to convince you to do it. And a lot of times people are like, dude, I don't want to hear what you're saying. And so a lot of times what I do is I speak to my own experience with cannabis and go, this has done this for me. And if someone goes, hey man, I've never tried cannabis, or I haven't tried it since the 70s, but I'm really curious based on what you said, then the invitation is made. And now I know they're coming at it from their own point of view. And now I can tell them, right? Yeah. I'm not going to convince them, but I'm going to say, hey, this thing isn't for everyone, but I'll tell you everything I know about it, and you can make your own choice and discern for yourselves. And so I think that's the first step. But let's say someone is like, yeah, they make the invitation. They're like, I want to try this, man. Like, let's go. Then what I would do is I would say, okay, what are your goals with this experience? Are you looking to find pain relief? Are you looking to have a spiritual experience? Like, do you want to be intoxicated, like experience the actual effects of THC and things like this? Or are you just like, I want to see what inflammatory relief I can find, right? Sure. So once I figure out what their goal is, then I can actually guide them. So let's say, because CBD and the inflammatory relief thing is pretty easy. You just give them a full spectrum tincture. And the reason you give them a full spectrum one is because of the entourage effect, basically, which states, like you said earlier, that when all the constituents of cannabis are placed together, the plant works better synergistically. And the great thing about full spectrum is that with hemp, you're going to have 0.3% of THC or under. And so you're not going to feel a psychoactive effect or an intoxicating effect from it, but you will still get that entourage effect. So from there, based on someone's individual endocannabinoid system, I would tell them to start around 50 milligrams of CBD. They'll probably need a little bit more, but I like to kind of gauge a little bit lower at first, especially with THC, but even with CBD, because some people might just end up spending a lot more money if they think they need to take a 200 milligram dose every time, when really 50 will do it. So that's really the idea of CBD and like the non-intoxicating components. It's like, hey, you don't want to spend more money than you have to. So for me, I'm around 100 milligrams of CBD to feel the inflammatory effects. My girlfriend is around 300. I have friends that are at 20. So like if I gave them all that 300 milligram dose, yeah, it's going to work for them. They're not going to be intoxicated, but like they might just be wasting a lot of money that they don't need to spend otherwise. Yeah. With THC, on the other hand, it's a slippery slope, because what I always did at the dispensary is people would come in and they'd either have no idea, or they'd be like, I already talked to my friend. Yeah, give me a 20 milligram edible. And I'm like, hey, listen, it's not like 20 milligrams is considered a lot, but if you're a very slow metabolizer of THC, and you can figure this out through Len May's DNA test, then your liver is going to metabolize things much slower, which means that a 20 milligram could be like a 200 milligram for a fast metabolizer. And so what I always started people at was a 2.5 to 5 milligram dose. And usually people, in, I would say 9 out of 10 cases, would either come back or like just call me on the phone and say, hey, I'm not feeling anything after an hour and a half. And I'm like, good. Okay, cool. Now go up another 2.5 milligrams. And over the first week, it's this trial and error period. So then they go, okay, yeah, 10 milligrams is like, I'm good there, right? So it's okay, cool. We'll start at 10 milligrams. And so once they've found their zone of comfort, then we start actually asking them like, hey, what are you experiencing when you interact with cannabis? Like what are some of the things that are coming into your mind, your heart, etc. And so having them keep track of that, because when you're interacting with the medicine or anything for the first time, I mean, even alcohol, anything like this, it takes a couple times to figure out what the experience is and then if you like it. And so what I do with cannabis specifically is it's like getting to know someone, right? Like you need to get to know them and build rapport before you know like if this thing's going to be able to help you in your life or not. And so with those initial times in which the effect actually hits them are those times in which they can actually go, yeah, I felt warm and fuzzy in my chest and I felt light on my feet. It's like, cool. Did you like that? Did that add to your experience of life? Yeah, it did. Okay, cool. Then let's continue experimenting. Maybe like in my dad's case, for instance, if he didn't have cancer, even when he was in an RSO, we had some great times, but a lot of the times he was like, I wish I didn't have to take this all the time. Right. So for someone like him, if he hadn't had cancer, he would be someone who maybe once a month would watch a funny movie, maybe interact with cannabis, access his inner child, if you want to talk spiritually, and laugh a lot, maybe connect with, his grandchildren, but otherwise he wouldn't really need it in his life. So these initial, experiences with cannabis can tell someone what it is, if they like it, and how often it's going to be in their life. And then from there, what I would do now with the information I have is share with people like, hey, this plant can provide feelings of comfort. And for people that might be living in discomfort, that can be very dependency forming. And so being able to understand that with great power comes great responsibility. And these plant medicines, they do have great power there. And so I always want to be in harm reduction, mitigating risk type area, because, I think a lot of people right now are thinking psychedelics are the cool thing to do. And what I always say is there's nothing cool about cannabis. There's nothing cool about psychedelics, right? It's something that you're called to or you're not. And there's not like, it's not like a pissing contest, right? And I think that we're seeing this a lot, especially in certain cities. I won't mention it, but I imagine the city I'm thinking of right now, where it's like, I've done 47 ayahuasca ceremonies and I'm doing my third ceremony this month, next weekend. And it's like, okay, cool. I'm not going to objectively say that's bad, but like, what are you searching for? And what are you doing for integration? Because if you're going back to ceremonies, I argue that you're not integrating properly. I mean, my last big experience was with psilocybin and it was 9 months ago. And I'm still integrating what I found from there. And I know the second I think about it, that if I tried to interact with psilocybin right now, I'd be like, what are you doing back here?
That's what I was just going to say. I was waiting to say that. Like, I know that feeling. And I've heard even Rogan talk about it. Like, that thing where you're like, you go in, you figure out something about yourself or about your place in the universe or what you should do or whatever it may be, whatever it is for you. But you have a good experience. And then you come back and it's like, hey, what the fuck are you doing here? We already told you.
Exactly.
Now, like, I think you and I agree on like 99% of all of this stuff. I don't engage with it in as spiritual a way as you do. We're just cut from a different cloth a little bit. But I agree with all the stuff you're saying here today. I want to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Behind you, I see what appear to be goals. Tell me about that, because shout out to you, dude, because I see those goals behind you. If you're cool talking about them.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, they're your background. You better be.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I put them there.
And how's that process going?
Dude, so this opens up an amazing rabbit hole I'd love to dive into, which is the concept of manifestation, which is a big woo-woo thing if you don't know about it already. But essentially, it's roped into the law of attraction and things like that. And the idea of it is, this kind of brings a couple different concepts together, but I want my goals to be visible. And I want them to be visible to not only me, but anyone I'm talking to, because then they get to go, hey, that's your goal. And I get to go, yeah. And then they can hold me accountable to it. And so I have more and more instances where then I can use the ego for what it's good for, which is like, we want to come through on what we say we are going to do. So therefore the ego can become a friend in that way, because I think something in the plant medicine space that's said a lot is kill your ego. And I think that's the stupidest saying ever, because your ego is there to help you. It's just doing the best with the information it has. And the funniest part is you programmed it. So why are you going to kill a part of yourself that you created? Like it's about reintegrating it and asking yourself what you want out of it and then recapitulating it, if you will. And so with these goals, I have this financial goal at the top, 40,000 and highly optimized per month. Then I have a more vague goal, more purpose revealing itself. And then under that, I have a 4,000 square foot house on a lake with all the best bubbies nearby, which is the term of endearment me and a lot of my friends use. It started with me and my girlfriend. I went to Mexico. My buddy Danny Rios started calling us bubbies, and then from there, it literally catapulted. Ask Mike Bledsoe about it. It's really funny. It's infiltrated the entire group that we're in. And so, and the last one is getting on Paul Chek, Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus, and Kyle Kingsbury. And when I made this, I made it in September, and I made it because I had heard about manifestation. I had learned all about it, but I started going to the Modern Mystery School and I became initiated into what they call the Brotherhood and Sisterhood of Light. And so it's a series of DNA activations and initiations that allow your being to hold more light. So essentially become more of a magnet for what you want, right? Like people just like, what is going on with this person? I want to be around them all the time, that kind of stuff. And so the theory goes that a long time ago, when we fell from grace, right? Like what they talk about in the Bible, what that really was after the last cataclysmic event on planet Earth. And this is just my theory and what I've heard. I'm,
Sure.
For people listening, it might be a little woo-woo, but apparently
after we're an hour 35 in, if they're still listening, then they're not bothered by the woo-woo.
Yeah.
Everybody else dropped off a while ago. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the story goes, and Graham Hancock and Rayla Carlson have actually given some credibility to this because we hear about Noah's Ark and this great flood. And apparently it happened 12,500 years ago. And Graham Hancock and Rayla Carlson, who are geologists, have gone around the world, dug down, and found anywhere in the world that you go, there's this deep layer of soot that carbon dates to 12,500 years ago, which means the entire world was engulfed in flames at one point. And so after this event happened, we lost a lot of the technology and the consciousness we had, and we fell from grace. And so there's theories around it with the Anunnaki and who knows what that kind of interfere with our DNA and kind of put a governor on it, right? On an engine where you can't go past a certain speed, you take that thing off, now your engine can wide open throttle. And so what the mystery school does is it's based on a 8,500-year-old lineage of bringing your DNA back to full speed and being able to allow your DNA to hold more light as a result of that. And so what they say is that once your basic needs are met, you get to start thinking about your wants. And so your wants are like they tell you to make 4 that are the main things you're looking to manifest into this reality. And then what the mystery school does is once you're initiated, you learn a set of sacred rituals, which there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, I believe 5 of them that I do every day, morning and night. First thing I do when I wake up, last thing I do before I go to bed. And one of them, I can't give too much info because it's a mystery, of course, but they're called calling upons, which is essentially like bringing in through calling upon different organizations, one being the Galactic Federation, which if you've dove into the woo at all, you know what the Galactic Federation is. It's kind of like Star Trek in a way, but really what you're doing is you're calling upon these high level beings to help you bring in what you're looking to manifest in this reality. And you're also keeping your attention focused twice a day at least on where you're looking to go, right? Because a lot of us, we get stuck in the past of what should have been or any of these things. This kind of puts you in a container to go, okay, I'm at where I'm at. This is where I'm looking to manifest. And I know I'm the creator of my reality and I can do it. But it's not just praying, right? It's a combination of praying and moving your feet. So then similar to plant medicines, right? Like the manifestations might be the what, but you have to follow the thread of your heart, your soul, et cetera, to figure out the how. So for instance, when I was looking to get in touch with Paul Chek, I started going to his workshops. And when I went to his workshops one time, I happened to bring a little bit of my cannabis and I gave some to him. And it was just like, hey, I know you like cannabis. Why don't you try this? And so he tried it and was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to talk to you. And then I ended up on his podcast and now he's a great buddy of mine. And so these are the kind of things that start happening. But as of this date, a lot of this has manifested already. I'm about halfway to the financial goal. More purpose is continuing to reveal itself every single day at an alarming rate. The house is in full effect, and I've knocked 2 out of those 4 off my big list.
Wow.
Right. And so it's fascinating because, again, I come from a psychological background. Correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, but it is a very interesting correlation. Yeah. And I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah. But, I'll even, again, like, I'm not going to, put a doorstop in the conversation here. I don't think about 90% of the spiritual stuff you're talking about. But the actual results are still, they're undeniable, right? I mean, writing down your goals, knowing where your feet should be moving every day, having an intention. I think the thing that really matters, because again, that's not to say that I don't believe you. That's not what I'm saying. It's not my vibe, right?
Yeah.
But knowing what your intention is and what you're trying to do. I mean, how many times? I mean, David Goggins writes it and puts it on a little thing in the corner, and he couldn't be further from you when it comes to the woo-woo stuff, right?
Exactly.
But I'll tell you right now, like, I forget who says it, but there's somebody, I'm not going to pull it right now, but there's somebody that's like, write down your, 5-year goals and then just start. And usually you get them done in 6 months. I forget. There's an actual. I
know that guy. I can see his face in my head, but I can't remember his name.
Grant Cardone?
Yes, it is Grant Cardone.
It's Grant Cardone,
yes,
I think.
That is who it is, yes.
Either way. And I just found out he's a Scientologist, so shout out to Grant Cardone.
Oh, interesting.
Scientology. But yeah, so Ryan, there's so much more we could talk about. And like I said, I will continue to have this conversation as long as you like. but let me think there if there's any specific question that I have for you right now.
Mm.
I guess maybe let's circle back to your capital B business. Like, what is the
Mm-hmm.
business? So like if I wanted to engage, if I thought I might be interested in engaging with you as a client
Mm-hmm.
of Highly Optimized, what would you help me to do? And, you know, not so much the technical of like that stuff, but like what exactly is the mentorship and the coaching in the program?
Yeah. So with cannabis specifically, we are helping you reimagine cannabis as a powerful tool for self-development and self-awareness so that you can gain connection in your life. Because the problem we're looking to solve at Highly Optimized is that we hear a lot that there's an epidemic of loneliness, but loneliness, I feel, is actually the result that's stemming from the real problem, which is the inability for most people in the world right now to connect deeply to themselves, those they love, the important work they're doing, and the world at large. And I think that as human beings, going back to human design, one of the things that's hardware rather than software, because there's things that are universal to every human, and there's things that are more like, you know, like individual things, right? Like maybe I like vanilla ice cream, you like strawberry.
Yeah.
Versus there's this need to connect. And I think that especially after the pandemic, we're realizing that like a lack of connection fucks people up.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so what Highly Optimized is all about is not only becoming optimized in your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being, but what do you do as a result of that? How do you add your magic to the world so that you leave the Garden of Earth greener than when you found it? And so Highly Optimized as an umbrella, that's our main mission, is to leave the Garden of Earth greener than when we found it. With cannabis, it's to reimagine cannabis as that powerful tool that can help you gain connection in your life. With Grow with Cannabis, it's more about learning how to cultivate a sacred union with the plants. You can connect deeper to the plant. Because again, how you do anything is how you do everything. So our mission with cannabis is not necessarily to make people think that they need cannabis all the time. It's to use cannabis as a training ground to learn how to connect more. So then they can go into their life and have better relationships, create the business of their dreams, et cetera, and bring their unique magic to the world. Because what I truly believe is that we all have unique fingerprints that have never and will never walk the planet again after we pass on and transition. And so what is our unique medicine that we can provide the world? Because I really believe, and my experience has been that it's in the differences that I find within each individual that really get me curious. Like that guy, Grant Cardone, is a Scientologist. I'm like, tell me about Scientology. It doesn't mean I'm going to believe it, but I want to know what your world is like. Right.
I know that I've never met a loser that was like, yeah, I'm a big Scientologist. Like, it's never
exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe it's really cool. Who knows? Right. If people believe in flat earth, doesn't mean I'm going to believe it, but I want to know what your argument is.
But don't you want to talk to them? You show me 9 people that believe in a round earth and 1 that doesn't. I want to talk to that guy.
I want to talk to that guy because I'm like, how did you come to that?
Yeah.
And I think that's another one of the biggest thirst traps in the world right now, is that we're thinking that we need to convince people of how our reality is, right? And so long as you're not hurting anyone, I think it's one of the biggest disservices you can do to your fellow human beings to try to convince them that their reality is not what they think it is and your reality is the right one. I mean, it's a form of gaslighting in a way, right? Which is a cliche term thrown around, and it's kind of silly, honestly, but it does make sense. And so I think that really what we're doing at Highly Optimized is helping people individuate and leave the Garden of Earth greener than when they found it, based on their unique medicine of the world. And we have plans. I mean, I have a buddy down in Virginia who I'm going to be creating a legal entity with and be the figurehead of that, where I'm obviously speaking to the education portion of this. It's going to be a totally different type of dispensary when it opens. And right now we're waiting for laws to catch up there. They've legalized, but they're not opening stores yet. So we have some great time to plan. But we have a lot of different ideas of what this umbrella of Highly Optimized is going to be. But you know, overall, it's to leave the Garden of Earth greener than when we found it and put the power back into the individual to not only individuate, but to do his or her part in allowing that reality of the Garden of Earth being greener than when they found it to be realized and recognized.
Nice. When does your book come out?
It's funny you mentioned that, actually, because I do have a book idea that I'm creating Grow with Cannabis right now. And then after that, we have a couple more things we want to do with that. And then from there, I'm going to move on to the book, which is going to be called Friends in High Places, which is all about networking and how networking is the biggest superpower you can have in business.
I agree.
And this is, it's like, if you know how to if you have the gift of gab, and even if you don't, but you train at it, it's literally just like, there's a guy, Alex Banian, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, that made this book called The Third Door. And when I read that, I was like, I think this is like a book that I've written in my head that I never knew anyone else like I just never knew it could be vocalized in that way. And he talks about how in life there are 3 doors, but most people think there are only 2. There's the door where you wait in line. Think about a nightclub where you wait in line like everyone else and you wait for your turn. There's the door where you're VIP, you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth, your parents are rich, whatever, and you don't have to wait in line and that's your in. But there's the 3rd door, which is you're walking past the bouncer and as soon as they turn their head, you're aware and you run down the alleyway, jump through a window, hop under the kitchen sink, and now you're in the club and you snuck your way in. But you didn't really sneak your way in. You charisma'd your way in, right? You allowed yourself to be able to figure out what's the missing link here. How do I decouple this? And what's the link I can find? And so for me, really what I believe in creating this book is that I can teach people how to find what people they admire are missing in their life. Like for me, one of the things is like a lot of people that I love, were looking for like a high quality experience with cannabis, but they didn't know how to access it. And so what the missing link I have filled in so far anyway, is allowing people like Paul and people like that to be able to experience a different side of cannabis that they knew existed. They had an idea, but they hadn't found anyone that spoke that language. And so when they did, all of a sudden it was like, wow, I want you in my life because you're providing something I'm missing. And now, because you provided that thing, that's just the intro. That's just the doorway. Now you get to connect with them and they're like, you become friends and family and all this stuff. And so I really think the secret superpower of life is networking, and it's what I've experienced. And so that's the book idea. And that's coming, I probably would say in 2024. So yeah.
All right. Well, if you're listening to this, don't steal that idea. Ryan's
yeah, exactly.
Ready. He's
copyrighted. I'm just kidding.
So listen, Ryan, there's 2 questions that I ask everybody that comes on the show, and I'm going to ask them for you now. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm
awesome.
ready.
Number 1, if you had access to unlimited financial capital, how would you profitably grow your current businesses?
Unlimited financial capital. How would I grow my businesses?
It has to be profitable. You can't just throw it away. Yeah.
So let me think on this for a second. Okay. So I know one way I would do it, which is more like the basic way that I think people would think I would answer, which is I would make love grown cannabis a bigger thing. And that's like the woo-woo way of saying it. What I would do is I would show farmers and I would show other cannabis facilities that you can actually save money by growing the way I grow. And so it's not only just the woo-woo and the connection to earth, but you can save money doing it. And so that's one of the ways that I would make money doing that is I would open up a countrywide chain of dispensaries. I don't want to call it a chain, but you know what I mean? Like essentially a chain of these dispensaries that were growing in that way, that were recycling their wastewater, that were creating their own compost, that were, doing all of these regenerative practices and regenerative loops to allow them to save money. That's one way. The other way is that I would go out and I would try to find people that might have an amazing gift, but might not have the financial resources to do so, to be able to explore it. And I would hire them to help me in my business. And I would make my business more and more unique. So that way, if I meet someone and maybe I'm not their flavor of ice cream, well, I have all these other absolute units that I could position them to maybe then I could convince them to invest or, for us to invest in them, et cetera. And so I would do it in that way too, is in investing in people that would therefore be able to connect with more people and then invest in their businesses and make sure they were in alignment and then make more money doing that as well.
I love it. Great answer.
Hell
Question
yeah.
number 2, if this is going to be hard for you, I think. If you had to give up everything to do with cannabis and any business you are involved in now or have done in the past and start something totally new, what do you think that might be?
Well, I mean, I could cheat and just say I would get into psilocybin or LSD, but if I had to give up everything, right? Yeah. I'll answer it the right way. I won't cheat myself out of it. If I had to give up everything, let's see. Honestly, I mean, shit, this is hard because I was maybe I'll create a meditation retreat, but that's part of what I'm doing already. So, okay, honestly, what really calls to me, and this is going to seem like completely out of thin air, but it's what came to me in the moment. I would get into driving race cars.
That's it. That's what I'm looking for, Ryan. Perfect.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I've always loved cars, man. My dad and, I grew up with classic cars around me all the time. Yeah. I'm a huge muscle car fan. So I think and it's funny because yesterday I was speaking to a client who I was like, what do you really want to do? And he was like, well, I really want to race cars. And in that moment, I was like, oh man, that's really cool. So yeah, racing cars. That'd be my answer.
Do you have a classic car?
I don't right now. I had a 2001 Mercedes CLK 430 that wasn't classic by any means, but it was a V8. Right. It was so fun. Yeah. Peanut butter interior. I recently got rid of it. Yeah. And I'm looking, my ultimate car would be either a 79 Pontiac Trans Am with the T-tops and the black with the gold eagle or a Chevelle.
Ooh, a
69 Chevelle SS.
Yeah.
My dad had a 69 Chevelle SS with a 396, and that thing was badass. I'd probably get the 427, but that would be my two picks right there.
My dad growing up had Oldsmobile Cutlass 442, the convertible one.
Sick.
Oh my God, it was crazy. And it was never restored, unfortunately, but it was just a beautiful car.
Yeah.
And I've got a 69 Bronco. I think I've just stamped it. I'm gonna only get 69s from here on out. So
yes,
I'm
dude,
looking
great
at maybe,
number, you know.
Well, that, but also I think that was like the pinnacle, man. I think 69 was the best year in automotive history, and a bunch of other stuff. We landed on the moon and some other shit.
Yeah.
But I've
Allegedly,
got the Bronco.
we landed on the moon.
I'd like to get
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I don't have another hour to talk, but I would definitely.
I'm just kidding, guys. I'm just kidding.
I'd like to do either a Mustang or a 69 Porsche, but we'll see.
Yeah, dude. I would love to do a Yenko Camaro as well, because ever since what was that, Too Fast, Too Furious?
Yeah.
When the Yenko was in that, I fell in love with that too.
Wow.
So yeah,
yeah, so cool, man. Well, Ryan, this was somehow even more interesting than I thought it was going to be. I was so excited to have you on the show. I think you're amazing. I would love to have you back on, as you're inevitably going to be doing more and interesting things.
Yeah.
So for the listeners that are still around, how can they get a hold of you and just give any plugs you got?
Yeah. So the best ways to get in touch with me are at Instagram at the real Ryan Sprague, Sprague. Funny thing about that name, I made it as a joke.
Yeah.
There's actually another Ryan Sprague out there who's like huge in the paranormal world. So I actually feel like I got to change that now, because I'm like, man, like that guy's really cool. And he's definitely a real Ryan Sprague too. But you can find me for now at the real Ryan Sprague. Or if you want the business account, where we're constantly giving out free tips and pieces of advice on a lot of the things we talked about today and deeper into that, you can find that at highly.optimized on Instagram. And then we also have a free Facebook group called the Ceremony Circle, where if you're like, I want to dive into Ryan's world, I want to get one-on-one time with him, or not one-on-one, but group format time. We're hosting, making posts in there all the time. We're hosting lives every Thursday tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're hosting lives where I'll hop in, I'll share a tip or piece of advice with cannabis, and then whoever's in there, it kind of becomes an off-the-cuff podcast. Well, then I go, how did all you guys feel taking this information in? And then someone will go, that made me think of this. And I'll go, oh, that made me think of this. And before you know, we're having a beautiful conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Because my biggest thing is connection. And then also the two podcasts, Highly Optimized, which showcases conscious leaders living a life beat of their own drum. I would love to have you on both of these, by the way. I want to make sure I tell you that as well.
100%.
Yeah. And so if you like the real hero's journey of individuals and how they got to where they're at, you'd love Highly Optimized. And then if you're someone who really loved this conversation, you're like, I want to learn about the deep, deep mystery of the world, hop onto This One Time on Psychedelics, which is my baby child. I love that pod. I love both of them, but This One Time on Psychedelics is just my area of so much fun, where we dive into true firsthand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of plant medicines. And so those are the places you can find me. If you want to find out more about the course, you can go on the website, highlyoptimized.me. You can find all the information there on Connect with Cannabis, and we're now doing a beta round for Grow with Cannabis as well. So you can find me in those places.
Wow. Ryan, this has been great. All those links that you just mentioned will be in the show notes below. So whether you're on YouTube or listening to this in your car, they'll be in the show notes. And be sure to hit up Ryan and let him know how you felt about the show. Ryan, thanks again, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for watching or listening to the show. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to show us some love by liking, rating, and subscribing so we can keep making more and better content. If you'd like to support the show and get a great additional content like exclusive shows and even live group masterminds, please head over to patreon.com/spearandclover to become a member of the tribe. If you're interested in learning more about how we help entrepreneurs, visit spearandclover.com or message us on any of our platforms. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.